Tonight's story is one that's been sitting with me for a long time. It's personal in a way that stories passed down through generations often are. It's about a theater, not just a place, but something bigger, something that once held so much promise, but became something else entirely. So let's take a deep breath together, settle in, and drift into this world of quiet whispers and forgotten truths. I suppose it began with my great-uncle, Elias. He was the one who had the vision for the theater. At least that's what everyone said in the beginning. Elias was a man who believed in creativity and shared passion in the magic of storytelling. It wasn't just a stage to him, it was a dream. Something built on the idea that art could bring people together, that everyone had a role to play. I remember the way my grandmother used to talk about those early days. It was beautiful, she'd say, her voice soft, wistful. Everyone had a job, a purpose. It worked. The way she described it, I could almost see it. The velvet curtains opening for the first time, the warm glow of stage lights casting golden shadows, the quiet hum of something being built from nothing. But dreams don't stay. Dreams forever, do they? Over time, things changed, not all at once. No, it happened slowly, so slowly that most people didn't notice until it was too late. Elias was still there, still directing, still making decisions, but other voices started rising around him. There was Marcus, for example. He had once been Elias's closest friend, the one who had co-written the very first script, the one who had shared in every standing ovation. But over the years, Marcus started speaking in a different way, with a different kind of authority. He had a way of making you think things weren't as good as they seemed. My grandmother told me once, shaking her head. At first, people didn't question him. Why would they? He made sense. Marcus talked about how some actors got more attention than others, how some crew members worked harder but weren't given credit. He whispered about fairness, about balance, about how the theater had to be managed properly, and before anyone realized it, the script had changed. Not on paper, not outright, but in the way things felt, the way people spoke in hushed tones, the way decisions were made without discussion. And then one day, Elias wasn't in charge anymore. No one knew quite how it had happened. There had been no argument, no announcement. He was still there, but his voice carried less weight. It was Marcus now who decided what plays were performed, who got which roles, who was allowed to stand in the spotlight. But what happened to Elias? I asked my grandmother once. She only sighed. He was still there, she said. He just stopped talking so much. That was the part that stuck with me the most. The way a man could build something, could believe in it so completely, and then watch as it slipped from his fingers without a single moment of fight. And the theater, well, it didn't fall apart, at least not at first. Marcus was smart enough to keep things looking the same, to keep people busy, to make sure there were still rewards for those who played along. But the air was different. Where there had once been camaraderie, there was now quiet competition. Where there had once been laughter backstage, there was now only tension. People stopped questioning things. Maybe they were afraid, or maybe they just told themselves it was easier this way. There were stories, too. Stories about how some actors had left in the dead of night, how their names were never spoken again, how some had tried to ask too many questions and suddenly found themselves pushed to the background, given roles that barely required them to speak at all. There was one actress, my grandmother said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Lillian. She was one of the first to leave. Or at least, that's what they said. I asked what she meant, but she only shook her head. No one ever saw her go, she murmured. By the time I was old enough to visit what remained of the theater, it wasn't much. The stage was still there, but the seats were empty now, covered in dust. The dressing rooms still had mirrors, but the glass had begun to crack. And Elias, he had stayed until the very end, until there was nothing left to fight for. He died there, sitting in the front row, staring at a stage that no longer belonged to him. What do you think he was thinking about? I asked my grandmother the last time we spoke about it. She smiled sadly. Probably about how it could have been different, she said. And maybe that's the thing that lingers the most. The way something can start with so much hope, only to change into something else entirely. The way power shifts quietly, in whispers rather than shouts, until one day the world looks completely different, and no one can quite remember how it got that way. So, my dear listener, as you drift off into sleep, let this story settle in your mind. Not as a warning, not as a lesson, just as a memory, a quiet whisper of what was.